Hey everybody, welcome to week 4 of our series on joining Jesus in the restoration of all things. It's been really a pretty incredible series so far. And if you're new to this, what we're doing is we're having conversations with different people around different subject matters. I mean, the idea of Jesus restoring all things is so vast because we're talking about all things, right? So we felt like it was important to, start to highlight certain areas that we see the Lord moving and working in the restoration business. And there's a whole life group series that's going on centered around this right now in the church. So if you're part of the church and you are in a life group, you've been tracking along with us most likely. And if you haven't joined a life group yet, it's a great time. It's never too late. There's always more room at the table for you to come and to sit. And this part that we're on today is kind of a continuation of last week, where we're talking about how the Lord restores the weary soul. And we had Dick and Maida with us, who I think did a great job just sharing about what happens when we get just fatigued, and not only physically fatigued, but what happens when our soul, we recognize there's something deeper. Our soul becomes tired and worn out. Where does the Lord meet us in that place? And how does he walk through those valleys with us and bring us through into doorways of hope? And so today is a continuation of that, where we're going to kind of really unpack more of it and also get a chance to hear from one of our good friends, Bob Naylor, who's he's an OG, as I like to say, your original gangster.
I thought you were calling me an old goat.
An old goat. and I know you from way back in my early days at the Pathway Vineyard, which was kind of the mothership of vineyard churches here in Maine. Every vineyard has, in one way or another, has its roots tied back to that church. And so I know you from, when I was a kid. Yep. You and your wife have been very impactful in a lot of the things in that community, and it's really been a really cool joy to have you at the McFalls Church, helping with so many things. And if I could take a moment, if you don't know about some of the drama that we've had in the church with our septic system, there's a lot. Yes. And we've had many situations where our bathrooms have completely exploded at very inappropriate times in the building. And Bob has been one of the biggest catalysts for helping us get that whole thing fixed and restored. And you're just a machine when it comes to helping find solutions to big problems. And so it's been fun to get to know you in that context.
So basically now people are going to remember me as the guy around the septic system.
Yeah, that's right, man. That's right. We're going to get a plaque. We're going to get a plaque in the building.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
But no, it's been really great, and we're really excited to have you here to talk with us today.
I'm glad to help out, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wherever I can, you know that.
Yeah, it's great. It's
cool.
great.
It's good. And I have some history with Bob because I was on staff at Pathway. We had a number of years together there, and you often joke around when I go to grab a tool to do something, you tell me to put it down because you know my lack of skill around tools.
Danger zone. Mike has a hammer.
But I so appreciate you, not only for who you are and what you do around, but one of the things that I appreciate, Bob, is that you're a confidant, you're a friend. Your return to Maine is quite miraculous. You constantly are encouraging me. You're asking me the question that Dick asked this past Sunday, which he landed on, which is, how's your soul? Mm-hmm. And I love that. But you have a very unique story, a story that is wrought with some pain, devastation, some signs along the way of whether you read them or not. It got to you to a certain place where you were in a position where you were on staff, and one of the temptations, I think, or it's part of the fabric of being a pastor, is we can fall into this temptation of reading things and reading the Bible for other people instead of like feeding ourselves first. And I want to let you speak to your own story, but you had something happen in your life where it pretty much blew up everything.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to have you just share your story, but then obviously land on the fact that you've been restored, because I think something that gives us hope is the answer to the question. The question being, can I, or somebody that I know, if someone falls away from God, can they be restored? And one of the things that I love to highlight is the fact that in church, as a Christ follower, when devastation happens, when people fall away, when failures happen, I think it's easy for us to point the finger, to talk about situations, to fall into the temptation of gossip and all those things. But I think as a Christ follower, we're called to like champion hope for a restored life.
Absolutely.
And reconciliation. You know, our first response can certainly be grief, pain, depending on how close we are to the person and the circumstances. But I've learned over the years that grace wins, the love of Christ wins.
Absolutely.
And when, even in your situation, when things happened, like my first response wasn't, oh, I wonder what God's going to do here to restore Bob. Right. But I've come to find that statement of like, as a Christ follower, I want to champion, even in immediate moments following devastation. Okay, God, what are you going to do to restore this? Yeah. And what part do I have to play? So Bob, if you would, like, I'd love for you to share.
Sure, absolutely. You know, it's fascinating. What I want to do is take a few minutes and just talk about my journey. And, you know, Josh, you talked about it. I've been around the vineyard for 30 plus years now. And very, very blessed to have the opportunity to just be a part of the movement here in Lewiston, here in Maine. And as my story unfolds, I wanted to talk about it in the context of the story of the prodigal son. Because I had an incredible inheritance that God had given me in terms of ministry and people and community. And basically I squandered that, which is the story of the younger son in the prodigal son story. And it's fascinating that you can get to a place where you don't even realize what you have. I didn't realize that I wasn't taking care of my soul. I think it's fascinating that Dick ended last week with that question of how's your soul? Because part of what I want to talk about is, what are you doing to take care of your soul? Because I was on staff, as you said. I had been on staff for 11 years. Probably 9 or 10 years I had been on staff when things started to deteriorate for me. And what happened is I wasn't taking care of my soul. You were talking about reading for others. I was leading life groups around the book, John Ortberg's book, Soul Care. And
Soul Keeping.
And I was Soul Keeping, thank you. And reading the book 2-3 times a year, actually, going through it, talking to people about it. And yet, in my own personal private life, I wasn't doing any of the things that he talked about doing. Yeah. Understanding what my soul was and how my mind, my body, my spirit were all interconnected. And I had gotten tired, so physically I'm weary. I was not taking time to do devotions, to just have that private time with Jesus, with God. My relationship was very fragmented. I started to isolate myself, projecting my insecurities, projecting my hurts and my insecurities onto other people, onto the staff, onto even people in the community. And, I became very self-focused. I lost that that focus on my relationship with God. I lost that understanding of I needed to be otherly minded. I needed to be open and honest about the fact that I was hurting, that I was broken. As a pastor and being in leadership, I began to, I generated this mindset of, I can't share with you that I'm struggling. Certainly not somebody I'm pastoring. Even that my coworkers and the leadership on staff, I felt like if I started to share that I'm not doing well, I don't know what I thought would happen. And so I just became very shut down. Linda and I use this as our spirits are closed. I just closed my spirit. And in the midst of that, I just gave wide open access to the enemy to come in and begin to generate in my mind thoughts and ideas, and that led into actions that took me right over the edge. And it's funny, I've thought a lot about how do you say that what happened to me is I entered into an extramarital affair. And I've thought over and over again about, is there a soft way to say that? Can I soften that? I was unfaithful to my wife. I committed adultery. I sinned. And that's it. It's hard to say that. There is no easy way to say that I crossed that line. And it's hard. But that's what happened, is I crossed that line. I allowed my life to just spin so far out of control that I compromised my values, I compromised my beliefs, and as a result of that, I just found myself in this situation where I didn't know how to get out. Now I'm caught up in the lies and the secrets and and there was part of me even where my mental health had gone to a place where it's like, I don't want this to come out. Obviously, you don't want to be exposed. I don't know how to stop this train that I found myself on, where things were just going so fast, and now this had taken a life of its own, and I was kind of out of control. And so I was at Pathway on a Sunday morning, and the message that was preached, there was a video that came up, and it was a pastor who had actually, his vocal cords had been damaged, and his whole identity was focused around the fact that he was a pastor. And as a pastor, without vocal cords, without the ability to speak, he was lost. And when he's sharing his story, it's very gravelly, and he talked about how he could only really talk for a minute or two, and then he had to stop. But he said something in the context of that message, and that was, Lord, don't leave me alone. Don't.
Yeah.
Just don't give up on me, basically, is what he was saying. And I thought, I prayed that as well. And I said, Lord, don't give up on me. And interestingly enough, a few weeks later, the affair was brought to light. And naturally, as a result, what happened was I lost my job. I lost the community of faith that I was a part of. I lost my identity, my self-worth, all the... Thankfully, Pathway was very merciful about how it was even communicated. And it was just that I had a moral failure and that things needed to change. And And but the rumor mill and things, and so it had come out that this is what was going on, and I found myself very lost. And fortunately, immediately God began the restoration process, and it started with my wife, because I've talked about me and and what happened to me up to this point. And obviously my wife was the most affected person other than me in the midst of all of this. And she chose instantly to stand by me, and she chose instantly to model and reflect the heart of God to me when she didn't have to, when she legitimately, biblically had the right to just walk away from me. And she's a pretty special lady. And she, as a result of my sin and of my fall, lost her church, lost her community, lost her network of people that she loved and trusted and were a part of. And for me, there's in my mind, it's like, okay, I understand why, why people turned and, walked away from relationship with me. Absolutely. I hurt people. And, but for Linda, she chose me. She chose to reflect how much she loved me, how much God loved me through her. And, it would be great to say from that moment on, the story goes to the restoration process, and we just were able to, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I struggled with my mental health. I struggled with overwhelming shame, overwhelming guilt, overwhelming anxiety of now what, where do I go? What do I do? I still was isolated. Now I was more isolated than ever. And intriguingly, God never was very far from me. The folks, as you're watching this, I will have talked on Sunday morning, and we'll have the two stools side by side, because God's just always right next to us, no matter what's going on in our lives. And it's the posture of our heart that creates the distance. And so God was right there with me. I went through 18 months of counseling and therapy, and was still struggling and not doing well, still not really dealing with the root causes of what happened. And I decided I needed to just leave. I couldn't deal with the shame. I couldn't deal with everything that was going on.
So by leave, you mean leave what?
Leave Maine.
Leave Maine. Okay.
Leave Linda, leave Maine.
Okay.
I grew up just outside of Troy, New York, which is near Bennington,
I've been
Vermont.
there. I've been to Troy, New York.
Yep.
That's where Troy Belt's from.
There you go.
Yeah.
And
there's a good barbecue joint right across the bridge.
there you go. A little plug there.
Yeah.
And so I packed up and I ran away. And a very dear friend of mine once told me, and this played out, is the problem with running away is when you get to where you're going, you're there.
Yeah.
Because what I was trying to do was run away from myself and trying to run away from everything that I wasn't dealing with well. And so you would think at this point that Linda would be like, I'm done. And yet she wasn't. She was devastated, as you can imagine, but supportive. She stayed in touch with me as much as I would let her. And she just always, I knew the door was open because she told me it was. And again, modeling that heart of God, in that God doesn't want anything but for us to be restored to him. Doesn't want anything but for us to be close to him, to have relationship with him. And see, what I realized is that I knew God, but I didn't have a relationship with God. I taught God, but I didn't take what the scriptures said and applied them to my life and to my heart, and to embrace them in a way that's intimate and personal. And so I'm in Bennington, Vermont, and things turn upside down there, which is God just going, hey, this isn't where you're supposed to be. And I end up living in a camper at my brother's house.
So is this kind of like
Troy,
back to
New
prodigal store, like son vibes? Is this like, are you eating pig schlop yet? Like wondering.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, living in a camper is
I'm
close to that.
I'm certainly at a point where it's like, this doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And I think and I'm starting to come to my senses, as the scripture says that when the younger son came to his senses. And it's also the reality of, at this point I had nothing. And yet I had everything at my, just like in the story, there's everything is right there if I'm just willing to turn around and come to my senses, smarten up, if you will, and do the right thing. And so Linda and I were talking one day, and she said, I don't even remember what triggered it, except a dear friend of mine said, you need to go home. And I think I said that to Linda, and she said, well, what's keeping you from coming home? And I said, to be honest with you, I'm just afraid that you wouldn't want me there. And she's like, you need to come home. And I gave my 2-week notice at the post office I was working at, and packed up my stuff, and I came back to Maine.
Wow.
And yeah.
Can we pause here before we pick up? Because you've brought up so many things that I think are really, really powerful, and also I have questions.
Sure, absolutely.
I feel like this is an okay place to pause.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah, because then we can talk about what happened once I got home.
Yeah, I want to highlight one thing that you've been talking about, which there's a lot of people that have experienced maybe similar aspects of what you're highlighting. It might be different scenarios that have caused it, but there is something uniquely painful about being either hurt by communities of faith or having to be in a position where you feel like you can no longer be within a community of faith.
Yeah.
Because it's different. And Casey Corum actually talked about this on one of our podcasts that we had like a year ago, where he talks about like, we were talking about, how calluses are kind of important. It means that your hands are tough, and they're also helpful it means that you know how to do theoretically good work, right? It means that you're used to working. What happens when those calluses get too thick? In the workout world, your calluses tear.
Right.
They actually become a problem, and they're painful. And so the metaphor really is leading to whenever you're in communities of faith or in relationship, there's how do you have calluses so that you can not get injured all the time and not get beat up all the time, but not lose the tenderness of your heart. But he said this thing that is very connected to what you're talking about. And he said, when you just get fired from a job, or if you quit a job, like a normal job, it's like, well, whatever, I'm just going to go get another job. But when you get fired from like a church, or or you get hurt by a church and you leave, a lot of times you're talking about you're getting hurt in like so many different areas because it's your social group, it's your friends, relationships.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it's also your place of employment, or it's where you worship. It's where you've connected with the Lord, where you've built history with the Lord. It's part of your spiritual heritage,
Yeah.
right? So it hits all these different places that are so painful. So as you were talking about that, I just immediately just thought, man, this is, so it's not simply like, oh, well, I'm no longer like on staff at Pathway. It's, I'm no longer on staff at Pathway. Most of my friend group, I'm assuming a lot of your friend group is there. It's the relationships, the people that we've discipled, some of them since they were children. Mm-hmm. It's our reputation. It's our history.
Our identity.
Our identity.
It's the heritage that is spoken of. It's the inheritance that's spoken of in the story of the prodigal son, because it's our legacy. It's there was so much tangled into it, and one of the things that a counselor told me is there's a phrase called moral injury. And moral injury can happen from you to me, or from me to somebody else, or I can create moral injury to myself. So my value system broke down, and my morals and my values broke down. And so there was this moral injury that I inflicted on myself, which spilled over into every area of my life. And it spilled over into, Linda's life. Mike was on staff at the time. So there was a level of injury that even Mike experienced because we were coworkers and friends. And losing the community of faith at a point where I was dealing with moral injury.
I needed it more than anything.
I didn't have the network.
Yeah.
And this is not a reflection on
No.
on
I know
Pathway
that,
at all, because I broke. I had been with the Vineyard 28 years ish at that point. So some of those relationships, those people, can you imagine the betrayal that they felt and experienced in their lives as a result of what I did? Where the way that I put the community of Pathway at risk, but what was hard, and then, and I think this is to your point, is when you've lost the net that you need the most, because I was so broken, I didn't know how to heal. I didn't have the people in the network there to help me, to walk along with me. And there were people that did reach out, in all fairness, and I wasn't even at a place where I could.
Yeah.
And so
when you speak of that net of support, church is certainly a social network thing. But what is weaved into that is an actual relationship with Jesus, and it flows through all those different avenues of connectivity, of friendship, of family, of conversation, of doing life together.
Yeah.
So it's not just like social, behavioral science type of thing where I have a network of people and they're the answer, and I lost that. Right. But like it's actually like a piece of every part of your journey with Jesus was connected to all those different areas and all those different people. So I mean the consequential reality of where you ended up certainly stings, and you find yourself. It's not surprising that you had the moment where you teared up a little bit and you were like, God, don't you leave me also.
It's such a David prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very much resonates with me as like you were saying that. I thought to myself, first off, that's a good prayer.
Yeah.
And I think that's for all of us. Like as I was hearing you say that, is like kind of like just one of those Holy Spirit moments of him inviting, I think, all of us to say, like, God, don't leave me.
Don't leave me alone.
Don't leave me alone.
Yeah. In other words, don't leave me in the mess to continue to mess this up.
And why that was like, I think that jumped out to me is immediately I remembered this thing that Mitzi McKellick had said back when I was in they had this life group at their house when I was a teenager. And she said, the devil loves to convince us to keep our sin secret. Like the shame of the exposure of it, right? He convinces us to keep it secret, to like not be open about these things.
To bury it, yep.
And to bury it and to hide it. And he loves that because then what he loves is then to expose it when it becomes really big to the light. And he like loves to see like the destruction that comes from the exposure of sin. And it's interesting because what does sin do is it puts us on an island, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
It gets us all by ourselves. It gets us alone where we're the most vulnerable. Yeah. And all of a sudden we can't let anybody else near or in because, oh my gosh, if they really knew.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that Jesus came to destroy, it was shame.
Yep.
Yeah. Wait, you speak of, there are two things that leap out to me along those lines is that isolation and desolation are like hand in hand. It's like a two-headed dragon. And I mean, the enemy is actually named as, he's desolation. And he likes to desecrate things and he meddle and to really wreak havoc. And, he actually says he comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy.
Yeah.
I'll never forget at a men's retreat, we had this moment where it was like really powerful. And I guess I don't have to like sugarcoat it at all for a podcast, but they were like just having like, it was like the Lord was moving in the room and there's like reconciliation happening. And they had all these different men in different groups, like praying for each other. But it was a time where they just basically just said to like, let's be real, raise your hand if you're struggling with pornography, raise your hand if you're struggling with it. Like they just went through all this stuff, all the especially sexual sin stuff that like, there's just like, when is there a moment on a Sunday morning that you're doing that? Like never. Right. And I remember my dad saying, do you know what's really cool about this is that you're realizing how unoriginal your sin is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like you're not alone in your struggle. You're not alone in this. So let's lean into the healing of the Lord and the freedom of the Lord right now. It was just so powerful.
Yeah.
It really was. And people that I knew and respected that were involved in like leadership, seeing like, oh my gosh, like these are, as a young man, seeing like these guys are fighting and warring with this as well and struggling with this. This is not original.
Right.
This is like, okay. It allowed me to kind of like go, all right, let's get free of this. Yeah. Let's let the Lord come and like fight on my behalf in this. And then also to, it also reminds me of this Wimber thing where it was like, never trust a leader that walks without a limp.
Right.
It's like, okay, we got some guys that are limping, but they're still called by the Lord. Yep. And gosh, like they have a mandate on their lives and just away with this lie that, that you gotta be this perfect human to be in any type of position of like authority. It's not to say that there aren't standards and that there isn't a different mandate. There is.
Absolutely.
There absolutely is. Yep. But it can't be an impossible standard.
Right. And it's understanding that there are consequences to
every action, right?
Sin. You know what? It's funny. As I've thought about sharing and doing this, some of the things that I've thought about is to remind people is that, in the kingdom of God,
Mike, you're very loud right now. Hold on, I'm just going to roast Mike for a minute. Are you okay?
I'm trying to get situated. I'm good. There we go.
There you go.
There you go.
Do you want to go sit on the couch next to Bob?
I'm limping over here, all right?
God looks at sin, no matter what it is, equally. However, the consequences of sin from an earthly perspective are dramatically different. when you look at the Ten Commandments, and I'm not going to go through the whole, but those are all weighed equally. And when you think of some of them, you shouldn't steal, but you shouldn't murder. In God's eyes, though, a sin is sin. But the consequences of those things are very different.
Vastly different.
And so, and then there are, there were consequences absolutely for what happened with me. And, but the other piece of this too is my story is very dramatic. It played out in a very dramatic public way. The enemy doesn't care whether it's very public or it's very, very quiet and very minimal. If you're separated from God, if you're distracted from your relationship, that's all he cares about.
Yep.
And so, as I share my story, you don't want it to be, well, what I have going on in my life or what I'm doing maybe even isn't that big a deal. Because separation from God is separation from God. Mm-hmm. And it's the posture of our heart that separates us from God. And so be mindful of that as we share.
Yeah, so you're coming back to Maine.
Coming back to Maine.
So were you excited?
I was very excited.
Yeah.
And very and in all honesty, scared to death. Not scared to death, that's too dramatic, but just nervous about I had Linda.
Yeah.
Her heart, I had just, yeah.
I'd love to at some point get Linda
her perspective
and get her perspective, and just I think it's encouraging because it's like, okay, so what are some of the things you do from that side of the equation?
Yeah.
And from my limited experience talking and connecting with Linda, just her steadfastness and her faithfulness and her not losing hope, and really, really believing Scripture about what it says about God's character. Because she could have easily just been like, well, done, fallen away, gone.
Yep.
She had every right to, totally dismiss you, divorce you, do all the things that, but she, for whatever reason, held on to hope that God wasn't done not only with you, but with you guys together.
With us as a couple, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She has written a series of articles. I call them articles, short stories, from the time that this happened. She has books full. And the first series of them was called Like a Tsunami, because the devastation was just this wave came in and washed our lives away.
Yeah.
But then there was this huge aftermath of destruction and things that we had to navigate through. She navigated through, and
what were along these lines of restoration, and specifically in your case with how God beckoned you, he was relentlessly pursuing you, he wasn't giving up on you. In our Christian faith, we have words like forgiveness, confession. I think confession is huge because it's the enemy doesn't want us to actually speak the things out loud, because I'm very much in favor of when you bring things into the light of the Lord, he's very good at restoring them and reconciling and fixing things and making things right and new. And the enemy doesn't like that. He doesn't want us to confess.
So I got back, and I don't remember the timing, but I think Linda could tell you. I believe Linda had been coming to Mechanic Falls at that point.
Yep.
And I wasn't at a place where I could even come to church. I came back to Maine, and I just, now I have all the shame of, okay, I had this fall. I went, and what happened is I was going through the motions of trying to heal and trying to figure this out, but I didn't have the, I just wasn't there yet. And so then I ran away. It's like, okay, well, that didn't work out so well. I came back, and now it's like, Lord, I prayed. I knew God, and I know God's heart for me, but I was so wrapped up in the shame and the guilt and the unhealthiness of everything that I had been doing that it was like, Linda was going to church faithfully, and I decided on a Sunday to come to Mechanic Falls. And you probably don't know this, Mike, but it was really something you said to me that that gave me hope. We used to joke around about, for a year I couldn't talk because I would get so emotional that my throat would just lock right up. It's like, I haven't had that happen in a while. But you said to me, you came over to me when you saw me and you hugged me. And you said to me, there's a place here for you. There always has been, there always will be. Something to that effect about you. And I thought, all right, I can come back to church. And because we had relationship, we had 8 or 9 years together, you know, it meant so much to me. And so I decided to come back, and I decided I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm just going to file in, file out. I'm going to stay in the shadows because it's safe there. And
I dream of doing that sometimes. Fantasize about that.
Interestingly enough, God will not let us do that. And what's neat is things just started, you know, God is just working through his people to bring restoration. Now, did I understand that or know that was going on? You know, Dick came up to me. Dick and Maida took Linda and I out to lunch and said, hey, you know, we love you guys. How you doing? And we had a chance to just to again feel like, okay, it's okay to be here. It's really okay for me to be part of this community. Even, you know, I walked around feeling like I had a sign that said, you know, my sin's worse than yours, on my head. And then words. Dick a couple of times said to me, you know, you're not your past. One of the things that was really a major breakthrough was he came up to me and prayed for me one day, and he said, you know, your record's not just gone, it's expunged. And expunged means it is no more. You know, a criminal whose record has been expunged means it's like it never existed. And then I found myself thinking, all right, well, I can, you know, I'll participate in the Friday morning men's group. And so I started going to that. And about 2 months into it, 3 months into it, one Sunday morning, I looked up and Mike Lyle's name wasn't on the list as a leader. It was my name. And I'm like,
oh, that's a bait and switch.
What
That's
happened?
a classical, like, hey, now it's your turn, buddy.
Now, in all fairness, Mike and I had talked a little bit about it, and I had been helping out, but he didn't tell me he was changing my name.
You had been going faithfully, and my schedule and building a house.
Oh, now you're explaining
made
why.
it so that I'm like, well, I'm not going to put my name up there to lead because I'm not consistent. Bob is though, so hey, here you go, Bob. You're good. And it's also, you know, it's also because I just know that God's not done with you, and you know, there's better days ahead, and ministry is still very much a part of that.
Yeah,
and
for me, that's just more of that restoration.
Yeah.
And what is, you know, I'm sure it's like ongoing, but what are the things that when you got home, like what were the things that you guys as a couple had to do to kind of like start over in a way? Or like, what do you even like just walk us through a little bit of that, like kind of journey of you're now back. There's been a tsunami, there's aftermath.
There's been
what do you start
wave.
with for rebuilding?
Yeah. Josh, I don't know as there was like a conscious, okay, we need to do this and this and this. Certainly one of the pieces of it was, and this is more corporate than Linda and I personally, but getting involved in church and beginning to reestablish Christian community and faith. What's so amazing about Linda, there's a million things that are amazing about Linda, but one of the things is she was never, I shouldn't say she wasn't angry. I mean, there was anger, but it was more the hurt and so we just had to talk about, for a long time, the hurt. I've had to just reassure her, and I will reassure her for the rest of her life, because when that trust was broken, the enemy comes in. Even now, we're 5 years beyond it, 5.5 years beyond it. Every now and again, I just have to reassure her. Some of it is just practical. I just have to reassure her where I am. I call them proof of life pictures. So I would take a picture of me with Mike at his house, for example,
right,
and just send her a note going, hey, we're putting up siding, or we're doing that, so that she knows.
Yeah.
Because of the secret,
yeah.
The secret of the sin is secret. And and some of it is, for a season, we went to East Point, down in Portland. And so there was a 45 to 50 minute, maybe it's longer than that, ride.
Yeah.
And that choked up thing that I was talking to you about earlier, we had a lot of conversations on, and even now we talk about, okay, this isn't an East Point ride, is it? Or maybe it is, but we had to talk through the hurt. We had to talk through the impact of this.
Yeah.
Restoration for something as dramatic as this for us was a process, and it still is a process. So I don't know if that answered your question. We Linda and I we work daily now on our relationship, and I know my what's the word I'm looking for? Not trigger points. Just I know it's like, all right, my mind is not good because I'm tired. I just came off a long stretch of work and a lot of things going on, and I'm tired right now. And so the enemy wants to
capitalize
on that. That's a good word. And so I'm just working. I work through those things, and she knows that. And I check in with her. Are you doing okay?
Mm-hmm. I know, like I have friends that have struggled with addiction.
Yep.
And they talk about just the journey and the path to health in that. And a lot of it is like the first step is just recognizing it.
Yeah.
Right. And really from there, it's a steady, daily, just recognition of like kind of just being honest and about where you're at, and not putting yourself in positions where you're going to be
compromised,
yeah. And that's in the beginning. And then eventually there becomes a time for some, not all, but for some, where they start to like feel comfortable. Like I know someone who, was, who's like 30 something years sober, who happens to also be a bartender. Isn't that ironic,
Yeah.
But anyway, so it sounds somewhat similar that you're just constantly having to be more open and transparent about this is part of the story, whether I like it or not.
Right.
And be willing to talk about it. I stumbled upon a C.S. Lewis quote earlier, which is that most of us have never really faced the facts about ourselves. And one of the things that propels us into facing the facts, he says, I'll just read it. It says, most of us have never really faced the facts about ourselves until we utter them out loud in plain words, calling a spade a spade. And just the power of story, the power of sharing, transparency, authenticity, certainly with some guidelines, and how that can bring along accountability. But even having those allowed conversations with the Lord, and being raw about it,
And that's, starting with that is huge. That just being, again, as an assistant pastor, I had talked about this. I had, taught it. We need to be real with God, because God knows anyway, right? If we believe what we believe, God knows. It's not for His benefit that I have to confess and be raw and real. One of my favorite movie clips is out of Forrest Gump, where Lieutenant Dan, they're in the storm, and he's in the crow's nest, and he is just railing at God. He's just angry because of what has happened in his life. Now, not in a sinful way. He's angry. Why am I still alive? And you watch that whole scene play out. And then the next scene is like the next day after the storm, and he's peaceful, and he has the sun's out, and he's clean shaven, and and the point being that sometimes we just have to let go of all that emotion and all those things in a healthy biblical way before God, so that we can get to the other side of things. But as my story unfolds more with Mechanic Falls, finding the church and the community, we're talking about restoration. I just found myself, as you guys are aware, that just becoming more involved in the fabric of the community of Mechanic Falls Vineyard. And not even really trying to, but just, we joked around at the beginning of this about the whole septic thing. But what that did is that provided an opportunity for me to step into a place of serving in the community because of my background with facilities management and understanding those types of things, and really not wanting you guys to have to spend an hour of your weeks talking about those
more
things.
than an hour, Bob.
Yeah.
Between the three of us and a lot of other people,
more like
it was a blessing that
100,000
Bob
hours.
Naylor's name was dropped in a meeting one day, and I bet Bob could handle this. Yeah, why are we mucking around with this thing?
And it's interesting because you think that my name was dropped, but it's really God. It was just saying, hey, here's another opportunity for restoration in Bob's life, in my life.
Yeah.
Because my heart, as you know, Mike, probably better than anybody in this setting, is to serve. I love serving in the community. That was something that was lost through my failures, through working with people. I used to joke around when this all took place. I picked up a thing, and the Lord's really convicted me about. I don't like people, and the Lord was like, that's not my heart, and that's not your heart deep down either. Yeah. And so through all of the brokenness and through all of the damage and the destruction and the tsunami, I can look back now, we're talking about where did restoration start, and I can see that immediately following my demise, God began the restoration process. God gave me the story out of Luke of the prodigal son. Within days after everything happened, I was at my house alone, confused, wrought with shame and sin, and I opened up my Bible and I opened up to Luke 15. And then the Lord reminded me that one of my most favorite characters, my favorite books in the Bible are 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and it's the story of David. And he reminded me of David's journey and how David fell. And yet the scripture says that David was a man after God's own heart. And it's like, I can't wrap my head around that. And David fell to the same kind of sin that I did in being unfaithful and a couple other things, murder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
is there anything you want to confess right now, Bob?
So, but in that, God was reminding me that, and again, I didn't have the mental wherewithal to understand that it was God's restoration plan for me, but that's exactly what was happening, is that just like the scriptures say that when Adam and Eve fell, immediately God started had set a plan in place for the restoration of mankind. Me personally, the same type of thing happened, which is when I fell. And so if there's anybody out there that's struggling with shame, guilt, sin in their lives, whether it's dramatic like mine or it seems simple in comparison, God has a restoration plan. And it starts with what we talked about earlier, which is, okay, I have to acknowledge it. I think you said that when you talk about addiction. We have to acknowledge that there is sin in our lives, that I'm dealing with this. There's nothing original under the sun. We know that. The enemy would love to make us think that whatever we're dealing with can't come to light because it's worse than...
He wants to destroy the image of God.
Yeah.
Yep.
His main objective is to try to destroy the image bearer.
Yeah. And God is right here on the stool next to you. He's right, in this case, the couch. And it's the posture of our heart that keeps us from God. And all we have to do, and I know it's not easy. It wasn't easy for me. It's easy to say, well, all you have to do is just change the posture of your heart. And that takes work. But in community, there are people that will help. This is a good time to plug life groups. In life group settings, there's an opportunity to get more real and more raw with people and to share your story. And I know that's your heart, Mike. That's you guys' heart to see people in life groups, their lives transformed through the community.
Yeah.
I want to highlight a couple things that we've been talking about, if you don't mind. There's the story of the prodigal, and there's another story that Jesus tells about a young, wealthy person. It's the rich young ruler.
Yeah.
And there's an aspect of that story and that interaction that's actually a little bit connected here. In that, and I like to insert ourselves into the story, and I understand that is not necessarily always the healthiest way to understand and read the context of a scripture, but I think it's helpful. As you're talking, I think it's helpful to insert ourselves into this. And if you've grown up in a communities of faith, or you have history within the church and communities, you are wealthy. You are wealthy in your relationships. So. You're wealthy in the heritage that you talk about, right? And so there's this aspect of that I think is important to grab onto, to realize that we are called. We're called into surrender constantly, aren't we? And that's the struggle. You read Matthew 19, which is the rich young ruler, and what does he start off with in this conversation with Jesus about? Well, God, what good thing can I do?
Right.
Yep.
What can I do that's good? What is wrong with that question? I mean, it feels so obvious to me that that is not only the thing that people within the church kind of slide into that parking spot with, but even people outside of faith just think it's about being a good person. And it's very easy for those of us that are in church, especially in leadership, to slide right into this parking spot of, I'm doing good things, God.
Right.
In fact, I'm doing them for your name.
I'm getting paid to
I'm getting
do them.
paid to do to do things
Right.
for you and for your name, right? And the invitation that he has is like, yeah, just give that all away, give it to the poor, and then like, come follow me.
Right.
And man, and you talked about this earlier on, like you know, as you've probably analyzed a lot of this, right? You've replayed things and where did it start and blah, blah, where did I go left and when did I veer off the path or whatever. We all do that. I think I'm super convicted as you're talking about this to like not lose the Lord, where are you? Don't leave me alone.
Right.
Yeah.
And just being fierce about like not forgetting that the cost of the Lord, the cost of like being invited into the kingdom is giving it all up, losing it over and over and over and over and over again, just saying, it's all yours. This isn't mine. And not just the physical, like things that we just constantly as Americans are like obsessed with. It's that.
But it's community.
And it's the
so much
community and
more.
it's the relationships and just the willing to just say, God, I lay it all down again and I'm yours. And what do you want? What do you need?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think we can wrap it up with this, and that is the story of the prodigal son. There are two sons in the story. And we watch the story of the younger son play out, and he comes home and he comes to his senses, even though his motivation for coming home is self-serving in the beginning because he's hungry and he
living in a
knows that
camper.
he can be better fed
In a
when he gets
van
home.
down by the river.
Right. But his father's response to him is just over the top.
Yep.
But then we have the elder son who's standing outside of the celebration.
Yeah.
And he's got his arms crossed and he's stomping his feet and he's angry. And the story doesn't tell us did he ever go in? Did he dig his heels in and not? You know, it's the story of two lost sons. And it's important for us to make sure that we understand that we have to choose the posture of understanding that God's right here with us. And we need to allow him to do just what to surrender to him over and over and over.
Yep.
And it's good to just come right back around to where this started with Dick's question last week, which is,
How's your soul?
how's your soul?
How's your soul?
What are you doing to take care of your soul?
Yeah. And that the end result can be celebration.
Yeah.
And as the pastor of Mechanic Falls Vineyard, I want us to live for those moments where someone walks through the doors and we embrace them and we say, there's a place for you here.
Yep. And if you're sitting out there and you're thinking, man, I'm doing all right, there's not a need for restoration. Take care of your soul.
Take care of your soul.
And don't get to a place where you have to have that story play out, because ultimately that's God's heart.
Well, Bob, thanks so much for sharing this, and can't wait to hear you preach on Sunday. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. So thanks everybody, and make sure that you like, share, do all the things. And if you're not in a life group and you're part of our church, we'd love to have you join one of the life groups that we have. You can find out more information about them online. And if you don't have the church app, get the church app, and there's all the information on there as well. So until next time, take care. Peace.